my pleasure to introduce the Health Story Collaborative. We are so excited to be partnering this evening with Health Story Collaborative, a nonprofit with a mission to keep the patient's voice alive in healthcare and to harness the healing power of stories. They are dedicated to empowering individuals navigating health challenges and helping them and their families to find meaning and ultimately heal through storytelling. Please welcome Delphine Liston, Annie Brewster, and Jonathan Adler. Following that, our featured storytellers, Dianne and Matthew.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you so much to SCIboston for having us here tonight. We're really honored to be here. You all do amazing work. Also, I want to thank in advance our storytellers, Matthew Klos and Dianne Vitkus. Vitkus, did I say it right? Good. They are amazing, and I will tell you more about what they're going to do in a minute, but just a bit of background very briefly, because we know we want to get to the heart of the program, which is the storytellers, just how we got here. So I'm a physician. I'm an internal medicine doctor at Mass General in Boston. I also am a patient myself, so I live with multiple sclerosis. And I came to this work of storytelling and health and founding Health Story Collaborative, the nonprofit, really as a response to what I see as what's broken in our healthcare system, both from the patient perspective and from the doctor perspective. And namely, that is not enough time and space for really honoring the stories of people's lives and for the relational aspects of care. And I'd say even more importantly, what I learned from getting a life-changing diagnosis, and I think people with spinal cord injuries know this more than anyone, that there is an identity shift that is required after that. And I'd never really thought about that as a doctor. Sometimes we think we're supposed to solve the mystery and just give the diagnosis and then it's over. But really, that's when the story is just beginning, and there is so much that people have to work on and integrate into their identity after a life-changing event. So I learned sort of through my personal experience that storytelling, both sharing my own and hearing stories of others, can really help us with that process of integration. And I started doing this work from my experience as a clinician and from my experience as a patient, and just intuitively knowing it felt right and that it was healing. And then I was lucky enough to meet Jonathan Adler, my colleague, who's the Chief Academic Officer of Health Story Collaborative, who studies the health benefits of storytelling. So I'll introduce him, and he can tell you a bit more about his work, and then I'll come back for a second at the end.
Thank you, Annie. And thank you again to SCI. What an amazing organization, and it's such an honor to be back. So as Annie mentioned, I'm an academic clinical psychologist, and my research focuses on the ways in which we constitute an identity by telling stories about our lives, the stories that weave together our past, our present, and our future. And I'm especially interested in those stories about big, challenging life events, and the ways in which the stories that we tell about them support our well-being or don't support our well-being. For the last 6 or 7 years, I've been focusing almost exclusively on stories of identity development among people with acquired disability. And I'm just about to start writing a book. So if you have a story you think you want to share, come find me, because I want to hear it. And so it's especially meaningful for me to be here with you tonight. So I've worked closely with Annie at Health Story Collaborative for about the last 10 years, and my role is really to help us ground the programs that we run in the science, which sort of distinguishes Health Story Collaborative from other storytelling-focused organizations. So stories are subjective reconstructions, but we can study them with the tools of science to find out what kinds of stories help people and which ones not so much. So you're not going to see any of that science on display here tonight, but we feel like we want you to know that there is this scientific grounding behind the ways in which we collect people's stories, help them work on their stories, and ultimately share their stories. So at Health Story Collaborative, we call events like this healing story sessions because the act of hearing these stories irrevocably changes them. The crafting of the story is deeply healing in one way, but the sharing of the story is also healing. So you are very much a part of the act here tonight. Yes, you are here to listen to these two stories, but in receiving them, you will undoubtedly shape them. These moments of storytelling are going to become part of the stories that are unfolding. So thank you very much for being here to join us in this experience of story sharing and story receiving. The stories you're going to hear tonight are hard stories. While you'll hear that our storytellers have managed to find tremendous meaning in their experiences, these are not cleanly redemptive fairy tale stories of gratitude for life's bumps. Annie often talks about the difference between cure and healing. And so in sharing these stories together as a group tonight, we're engaged in the communal work of healing. And that's not something to take for granted in the fragmented and parallel lives that we often end up living. Coming together to really deeply attend to someone else's story is a powerful intervention in the way our lives tend to work these days. So thank you to our storytellers for bringing us together in this way, and thank you again to SCIboston for making the space for this special occasion. Okay.
Thank you, John. So the way we're going to run this is we're going to hear first from Matthew, and then we're going to just transition and hear from Dianne. Often when we do these events, we have time for Q&A, but we're not going to have time for that because of the structure of tonight. But we want you to know that we left little pieces of paper on the tables and pens, and what we do is we have 2 jars up here, and they have each of the storytellers' names on them. So if you feel moved to leave a comment or any sort of message you want to convey, you can leave that in the jars at the end, and it is really meaningful for the storytellers to bring that home. I want to thank both of the storytellers for engaging in this process and for being willing to share with us, because it is not easy. I can promise you that. It's a lot of work emotionally and just time-wise, and they have really engaged with the process in a really meaningful way. And it's a gift to all of us because they are inviting us into their stories, and it creates an opening for all of us to think about how what they say resonates, or to think about our own lives. So your job as an audience is really just to be present, to be open, to witness their stories, and to reflect on how it touches you, and to hopefully feel gratitude for their effort in being here. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment. So I'm going to invite Matthew up first to share his story. We'll just take a second to get set up, but we are very excited to hear from him.
I'd like to do a little exercise and to create a little visual and physical context here before I begin my story, okay? If everyone could spread their hands about 18 inches wide, roughly, okay? It's great. It's a little big, Dan. All right? Now, I want everyone to take their index finger, okay? And let's grab onto that. Feel the thickness of that. Everyone's is a little different. Some are thicker, some are smaller. That is roughly the length and diameter of your spinal cord. Spinal cords have 3 primary roles. They send information, commands from the brain to the body. They transmit any sensory information back up to the brain, and they control our reflexes. I have spent an immeasurable amount of time laying in bed at night, contemplating the small stature of that organ to the unfathomable role it plays in living life. I was born and raised in Newburyport, Massachusetts. It's about 45 minutes north from where we currently are. It's a small city, famous for its historical downtown, and has a rather peaceful coast. It's pretty yuppie, but the older I get, the more I'm able to appreciate it. I'm probably just becoming yuppie myself. My parents divorced when I was 1, and my only sibling is 10 years older than me. I usually just say I'm an only child. My mother was stiflingly overprotective. I mostly grew up reading fantasy and sci-fi books, playing Dungeons and Dragons, and sketching things I wanted to make. I spent most summers at a Boy Scout camp in New Hampshire. Those summers really set the foundation and tone for the rest of my life, looking back. I've just always wanted to build cool shit. I didn't care if I was painting small miniatures to fight in fictional war scenarios, or out in the driveway trying to change the oil in the car. I love making, building, and fabricating things. A memory I often think of, and I think is fairly indicative of the trajectory of my life, was in my early teens. I was roughly 16, in Boy Scouts. It was fall, and there was an upcoming pumpkin chuckin' contest. Troops from around the state were tasked with making catapult-like devices to throw a pumpkin as far as possible in a field. I worked up a design of a medieval French trebuchet I read in a book. It was 12 feet tall and could throw a pumpkin hundreds of yards. My troop and I made it completely from construction-grade lumber and fasteners from Home Depot. Ironically, a younger kid got in the way of the throwing arm and was sent to the emergency room. But I was incredibly proud, and that weekend is burned into my mind as being so alive. I went on to go to art school for my bachelor's. I majored in photography and sculpture. Primarily, I fell in love with woodworking and analog film photography. Most of the things I made were self-portraits printed in the darkroom. I'd often then make elaborate wooden boxes to hold the prints in afterward. During this time in my life is really where I began my lifelong obsession with the pursuit of craftsmanship and the concept of the handmade. After school for many years, I worked as a professional printer and framer. Coincidentally, there's a pretty famous picture of Dolly Parton in her dressing room in the early 70s that was hanging in the Smithsonian for years. I printed that by hand in a darkroom and then made the frame myself. It's pretty big. It's roughly 40 by 40 inches. Easy does it. Some of the projects I worked on are in collections such as the Getty, MFA Boston, Guggenheim, Elton John's collection, the MoMA, and the Metropolitan in New York. But about now, you're probably thinking, dude, let's get to it. How'd you end up in that chair? It was April 25th, 2016, just a few weeks before I had celebrated my 26th birthday. It was a Monday morning, around 2 a.m. I woke up with lower back pain on my right-hand side that wrapped around into my stomach. Certainly felt weird, but I didn't think much of it. I got up, went into the bathroom, walked around a bit, just laid back down. A few minutes later, that pain increased. So I got out of bed again and walked around a little bit more and took a few deep breaths and sat on the edge of the bed. After about 3 minutes of sitting there, staring at the wall and trying to make sense of that sensation, I just blurted out to Jess, "We need to get to the ER now." That wrapping pain sensation just started to ramp up and up. That anxious fluttering sensation in the center of my chest started to bubble up, and that pure fight or flight mechanism kicked in. I felt like an animal trapped in a snare, wanting to chew through its own leg. I wanted to escape. An important note, I think, to relate here is up until this moment, I had managed to keep myself out of the hospital under any type of acute medical trauma. I do not like hospitals. I do not like doctor's office. For me to cry out that we need to get to the ER was of no insignificance. I was in such panic that I ran down the steps and was waiting for Jess to get ready. I then ran out into the backyard. I still thought in my head at this point, maybe I just need to move around. It feels so foolishly naive as I tell this now. Back and forth I ran. I ran to the driveway. I ran around my garage. Run it out, dude, I was saying to myself. Looking back, trying to describe exactly how this pain felt, it was almost like there was an explosion inside my body happening over and over. Or a lightning strike, running under my skin, but lasting much longer than a millisecond in the sky. I once read the description of a man being attacked by a tiger, which also seems fitting. The hospital is only 3 minutes down the road for us, and I remember pleading with Jess to drive faster. I remember repeating, "I think I'm dying." Unimaginable fear coursing through my body. I didn't know what to do. I started to punch the dashboard over and over. Oh God, I'm going to die. We had barely pulled into the parking lot. and I already had the car door open, running towards that huge illuminated ER sign like a beacon of hope in the hell I was spiraling down into. I really can't express the thought that I was dying. There are 2 entrances to our emergency room. One per patient's around the corner from where we had pulled in, quite far for me to run considering the agony I was in. So I ran to the closest entrance, designed for emergency personnel and incoming ambulances. It's made up of a large wall, floor-to-ceiling glass panes that you can see straight into the hospital, straight into the ER. A janitor was calmly mopping the floors right by the door. I ran to the door and yelled, "Can you let me in?" The door is locked from the outside. "Sorry, sir, can you come around to the other door?" "Jesus fucking Christ, are you kidding me? Open this door, dude, I'm dying." I barked back at him. He just shrugged and kind of pointed me towards the other wall. Around the corner, through the patient entrance, I ran. I ran to that patient entrance. About 5 minutes later, I was taken into a small intake room, asked to sit down, give my vitals, and explain what was wrong. After telling the nurse how I felt, she calmly said, "You're fine, hon. You probably have some kidney stones. You're going to be fine." When she asked me to stand back up and go into the examination room for the doctor to see me, I fell to the ground. And I couldn't stand back up. 20 minutes ago, I had just sprinted into that hospital, and now I couldn't stand. Something I often think about is that just that past weekend, not 24 hours before I fell in the hospital, I was in the backyard with a chainsaw, trimming a tree and cutting up an old fence I was planning on rebuilding that summer. Running around the yard, ripping my shirt off, yelling obscene jokes to Jess, revving the chainsaw as she laughed and looked at me in a mixture of disapproval and love. It sounds cliche, but things really do change in an instant. I was in the emergency room for hours, eventually getting an IV with pain medication, then transferred into Boston. Once there, things began to move a bit faster. I remember having an MRI, which took 2 hours, an IV with contrast being pushed through my veins, creating a warm sensation surging through my arm. I was a little boy, and I was scared shitless. I couldn't move. No one said anything to us. I couldn't pee, and the loss of sensation was gradually rising higher and higher up my body. During that MRI, a mixture of sweat and tears rolled down my face, and at one point they had to stop the scan because I was trembling so much. Any kind of serious movement interferes with the accuracy of that scan and the imaging. I kept asking the technician, "How things are looking in there, man?" "I just take the pictures, but you're doing great. Just a little bit longer," he would say. In the end, we find out that I have what is called an arterial venous malformation, commonly referred to as an AVM. That was inside of my spinal cord. This little mass was most likely a birth defect of entangled blood vessels that grew abnormally, roughly the size of my thumbnail. Those vessels burst and created a blood clot that put pressure on the spinal cord, resulting in permanent damage. Earlier, that explosion I was describing, it was an explosion of pressure. There was never a single warning sign. There were no symptoms. I could have lived the rest of my life never knowing it was there. A neurosurgeon was brought in to release the pressure in that area in a surgical procedure known as a laminectomy. Trauma warps the mind. And when it comes to memories, it's hard to remember what exactly happened or what my mind has filled in. I remember being rolled into a brightly lit surgical room, tools all lined on trays next to the bed. I think I said out loud to them, "Jesus, you couldn't wait to bring those out until I was asleep?" Slowly, the nurses turned my helpless, lifeless body over onto my stomach. I was so afraid to fall asleep as the anesthesiologist asked me to count backwards from 10. I locked my eyes with her, forcibly counting. 10. This isn't going to work on me. 9. Fuck, I'm going to die. 8. Don't fall asleep, Matthew. 7. darkness. I still didn't understand really what was happening to me, to be honest, though. I knew a mass needed to be removed, but that was it. I had no idea what the spinal cord did. Just a quick procedure, probably in and out. I'll be fine. I'd end up staying a week in the ICU, 2 weeks on the regular floor hospital, and then 6 weeks in rehab at Spalding in Charlestown. I don't really remember much in the beginning. I was in a fog induced by painkillers. Out of self-preservation, I think my mind has blocked most of that time out. Once on the regular floor of the hospital, I can remember only a few things. Jess stayed with me every single moment, never leaving my side, sleeping on a cot, on the floor, or in a chair. We had only been together 3 years at the time of my accident. I told her, leave your life. You do not have to do this. She never left, and this month will be 10 years together. The next major memory was the uncontrollable pain. Uncontrollable. My back hurt so much from that surgery and the onset of nerve pain. I would always have the nurses check the sheets to make sure there wasn't any creases that were folding on my skin. It's hard to put into words the paradigm shift becoming paralyzed really is. For me, it was incomprehensible to process being fine one moment and the next I'll never walk again and be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. I think for most of us, maybe it was just me, when you think of being paralyzed, you just imagine not being able to move or feel. If that was just that, it'd be pretty bad. It's not. It's worse. Bladder and bowel function, gone. Sexual function, gone. Debilitating pain when you actually wish you were dead, you bet. Constant concern over breakdown of skin, sign me up. All sense of control, independence ripped away from you, absolutely. In the early weeks of paralysis, every day you are forced with a new obstacle you must face and somehow manage while being completely out of control of your body. It's a difficult time, and I always feel a deep sense of sorrow when I speak with someone newly injured. It's a relentless onslaught of problem after problem, juggling 20 plates in the air while you're trying to learn how to juggle. Paralysis is different for everyone. It's a stupid expression, but we are all like snowflakes, each one singular, unique in its design, melting in our own ways. Personally, paralysis brought on a very difficult amount of leg spasticity and neuropathic pain, as I mentioned. Those of you who do not know leg spasticity, it is a condition that some people with an SCI can experience. Basically, the ability for your brain to send correct signal to your body's muscles gets damaged, causing those muscles to constantly fire and contract, becoming very, very tight. So tight, in fact, that they will stick straight out, or you can't bend the leg back just to sit in the chair, making it difficult to transfer, get dressed, sit in the chair, or drive. Pretty much every aspect of living, and on top of that, it is extremely painful. In severe cases, when oral medication is ineffective, a medical implant will be used called a baclofen pain pump. It's a small implanted device put into your abdomen that has a reservoir of liquid medication with a catheter that snakes around to your spinal cord. It drops liquid medication into your spinal fluid. It's scary shit. A never-ending cycle of vicious pain. It took me 3 years into my SCI journey to take the plunge and decide to get that pump. The concept of having that small hockey puck-shaped mechanical object implanted in my body after everything I had already experienced was unimaginable. The day of my evaluation to have the pump, I remember my spasticity was so bad when I got onto the table, my leg shot out and kicked a painting off the wall. They didn't bother having me do a trial. The procedure was scheduled that day. It's the best thing I ever did for myself. It was never the chair that felt difficult. It was always the pain. Don't get me wrong, the chair sucks. Yet upon reflection, I think I adapted to the wheelchair very well. The pain, however, was relentless. It was personal. It was cruel. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I was angry and looking for someone or something to vent that anger onto. For many years, I felt utterly hopeless. I can think of many occasions in therapy talking about wishing I had died on that surgical table. I wasn't suicidal. I just didn't want to exist with what felt like a prison sentence for a crime I was wrongly accused of. I was disabled, not from the wheelchair, but from the pain. It took a while, but eventually we were able to get the medication cocktail correct in the pump. My legs stopped hurting. They weren't shooting out. I began a little momentum. I was more active. I was more confident. My brain felt clearer and more open. 3 years after my injury, I went back to school, and I received my Master of Fine Arts in Photography and Integrated Media. I graduated in 2020, the absolute perfect time to enter back into the workforce. After being on disability for 5 years, I finally managed to get my first job. Working from home at a financial firm taking phone calls. It was awful. However, I was absolutely determined to get off SSI and have a job. The job sucked, but the feeling of being a normal part of society and being able to help support my household was a major boost in self-confidence. I quit, and then I moved up to a temporary teaching position at a private high school in Belmont, teaching kids woodworking. Awesome job, long commute, didn't go to a full-time gig. That leads me to where I am today. I now work full-time at Spalding on a research team, speaking with people with SCI and utilizing their experiences for a research database. Along with my Spalding gig, I work part-time in a custom picture framing shop, and I make the frames. In my spare time, I am what you would call an obsessive do-it-yourselfer, from doing stonemason work, hanging drywall, laying hardwood floors, making furniture, painting the outside of my garage. Our entire basement of our home is a full wood shop and a studio darkroom. If it involved tools or making something, I probably could figure out a way to do it. The first week back from rehab, I remember taking an iPhone video of myself running my cabinet-grade table saw from my chair and sending it to them. I also became everything obsessed with BMW. In our garage, another workspace outfitted for metalworking. I have an older 90s BMW that I'm currently rewelding the floor pans into. This really feels like the purest outlet of my passions. Recently, someone asked me, how do you do these things? If I'm being honest, which I am, it's a mixture of anger and some stubbornness. If you haven't picked up on my vibe by now, I'm not the most positive glass half full kind of guy. I'm blunt, I'm brutally honest. Most times my interactions with people, you either love me or you probably thought I was an asshole. I believe in the positive, therapeutic treatment of swearing, loud music, and a good primal scream. Everything slows down and becomes more difficult in the chair. You have to approach things with a problem-solving mentality. I take things as personal challenges that need to be solved. I will not sit here and say everything is okay, or that I wouldn't change it if I could. I'm pissed. And I'm going to still be pissed. I don't think that's going to go away. Finding someone that can commiserate with you and understand firsthand, I attribute to a major step in my recovery. When I was first injured in Spalding, I desperately wanted to speak to someone who had lived through what my life had just become. I wanted a teacher. I wanted someone who lived it every single day. I wanted someone who had survived it, and I wanted someone who kicked its fucking ass. I began to have meetings with peer mentors through SCIboston, trying to find someone I could connect with to glean some knowledge of how the hell I was going to live my life. Admittedly, I found this process extremely difficult. I had a few meetings with people I just didn't click with, but that last peer mentor was Dave Estrada. Having been paralyzed himself for 20 years at the time that I met him, Dave would end up being the most influential person to come into my life. By most standards, Dave lived a normal life. While I felt so abnormal, I felt like a freak. Jess was always there to reassure me that everything would be okay, and although I knew she was being genuine, I wasn't convinced. Dave was married, had a kid, drove a car, he had a full-time job. Everything this guy knew, I needed to know. We instantly connected. And at the end of our first meeting, Dave said, "You call me anytime for anything you need." Fuck it, what did I have to lose? I texted him almost every single day for the first few months I was home. Dave taught me how to cath correctly. He taught me how a wheelchair should actually fit you. Showed me how to get in and out of my car and for it to not take 15 minutes. Showed me how to drive the car with hand controls. Showed me how to get off and on a toilet. This is becoming a love letter to the famous Davey Estrada. But the real truth here is, without Dave showing me how to do all of those things from the perspective of an actually paralyzed person, I'm not sure I would be here. We know more than any physical therapist or any doctor will ever be able to tell you. Molly, I'm sorry. Thank you. I appreciate my rants, and thank you for stretching my legs. When I talked about my job earlier at Spalding, Dave was the one who hired me to be on his team. He's my boss. If someone offers you help and they say, "Give me a call," take them up on it. You'll never know what's going to happen. Problem solving and proving I can do something difficult has become the fun part for me. I want to be the guy in the wheelchair who everyone asks for help, or if he has the tool to fix it. If I were to look for an actual silver lining here, becoming paralyzed made me a better craftsman. It's made me more patient. It's made me more intelligent. And it's made me appreciate things that are so small. Unless you have experienced the level of desperation, you simply won't get it. There is a proverb I recently heard, which I quickly fell in love with. Calm seas do not make for skilled sailors. My hope in sharing my story with you is that tonight reminds you that there are still skilled sailors out there willing to sail the rough seas on this turbulent voyage with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. For someone who works with narrative all the time, I'm always humbled by the moments when words feel inadequate. Thank you feels like it barely does justice, so thank you. Yes, let's do that one more time. So we're going to transition and hear from our second storyteller, Dianne Vitkus. So let's welcome her to the stage.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dianne. Thanks for having me. All right, so you guys are allowing me to share my voice inside your head, which is a very sacred responsibility. There's a lot of intimacy in sharing someone else, living in someone else's mind and sharing that moment, and I just want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge that there are many different pieces to my story, and this is just one small part. As someone who challenges the feelings of grief and loss and trauma and anxiety and depression, I I find a lot of meaning in sharing my story, and because of that, I find it extra special that each one of you guys are here tonight listening. Just by listening, you're giving me meaning. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thanks for being here. I hope this process can lead to some healing for some of you even. I know the process of simply writing it has brought a lot of healing to me. And for that, I also want to thank Health Story Collaborative and SCIboston for having me, creating this space, and asking me to share my story. So when I was about 7 years old, I remember jumping in the back of my parents' 1992 Plymouth Voyager. You know, the ones with the wooden paneling on the sides? Yeah, we had that. I was so eager and excited that it was finally my turn to make the 3-hour road trip to my grandparents' house for the weekend. My grandparents were so important to me and my 2 older sisters, so we cycled through visiting them often. My papa taught me how to fish in the pond behind their house. I always insisted he throw back the pregnant fish. He insisted he did, but I don't know if he could really tell. My grandma used to tell me I was going to be a doctor. Since I was about 7 years old, she was grooming me. We would play doctor together with her old stethoscope from her nursing days. Oh, okay, thank you. And her old leg cast from when she broke her femur. Me and my grandma ended up having that in common as I broke my femur a year ago. Actually, maybe I can. Yeah, I should have thought of that before. I do have hands. So Grandma never stopped telling me how great of a provider I would be one day. Years later, they moved down the street from us, so I got to stop by whenever I would pass their house on my long runs around the block or on my drive home from high school. When saying goodbye to her 5'2", frail but mighty warm body, she would squeeze me as tight as she could around my bony hips and call me doctor. I'd roll my eyes, look down at her, and smile, you know, Grandma, I don't know if that's what I'm meant to be, before telling her I loved her and giving her a big kiss. My grandma died when I was a freshman at Brown. It was spring, and we were in the middle of my lacrosse season. Balancing school and lacrosse was definitely hard, but it was a lot of fun, too. I was still deciding on what major I was going to declare, so I filled my course load with chemistry, calculus, and neuroscience like a crazy person, just in case I needed to go pre-med, because Grandma was always on my mind. Fast forward 6 years, I was graduated from Brown and attended graduate school to become a physician assistant. I think Grandma would have been proud. I was working as a surgical PA and living 25 minutes from my parents' house. Never did I ever want to live that close to them, but it low-key was the best. And the work, it was exciting and meaningful. I didn't mind, as my colleagues would say, being verbally assaulted by my arrogant attending surgeons in the OR and overworked for being new by working all the weekend and overnight shifts, despite what my contract said. It was worth it to me. Call me crazy, I loved the thrill of the unknown emergencies that would arise and the calmness those shifts required of me. And I loved operating. Plus, it provided me with a pretty comfortable lifestyle. I was living within my means, saving for retirement, dating, living with my best friend from high school, dreaming about the future while loving and appreciating the present moment. I was no longer stressed with schoolwork 24/7, and I got to see my family almost every weekend. I made it, I thought. I was in my late 20s and living the life of my dreams. A typical day for me, my alarm goes off at 4:45 a.m. I snooze at 4:47 a.m. Snooze, 4:50, crap. I shoot up from bed, my workout class starts at 5. Quickly I throw on the workout clothes I'd laid out the night before, sneakers on, water bottle full, sweat towel in hand, and I'm off. I sprint down to my car, I pull a U-turn and speed down the road 1 mile to my gym. I'm 2 minutes late. Trust me, nothing's changed there. Now it's 20, 30 minutes late everywhere I go. I throw my belongings down and jet to catch up to everyone as they jog around the building in the crisp morning air. I'm half asleep, but I don't want to be anywhere else. The intensity of this gym sets the tone for my day. Lights are out, music is blasting, and 25 athletes are pushing their bodies to the limit. There's free weights, there's cardio, there's yelling, there's teamwork, there's everything that gets my blood pumping and my endorphins released. Just like that, it's all over. All too fast. I'm back in my apartment. I hop in the shower. I only have 20 minutes before I have to be at work. I'm rushing to the max, but I live for this. I make it to work, change into my scrubs and sneakers, and I'm at the table for change of shift and sign out. This is where my overnight colleagues give us a report on what happened during their day and during their shifts and updates on all current patients on our census. It was March of 2020. It had been 4 years since I did a semester abroad in Greece and traveled all throughout Europe. It was time to travel internationally again. So me and a couple of my friends, we packed up and we were going to Brazil. We made it as far as Florida when the world shut down. When we began to having to realistically consider if we were going to be stuck in Brazil if we went, we knew we weren't going. So back in Syracuse, New York, I returned to work. There's no work for home for hospital workers. It was back to my typical days. On my off days, I'd get to sleep in, spend the afternoons hiking, going on long runs, rollerblading, boating on the lake, and watching sunsets. May I remind you, it's July of 2020. Everything was shut down. There wasn't really anything else to do in my eyes but to really appreciate what was right in front of me and just enjoy nature. I had to lean into that side of me. I needed an outlet. I was still healing from a breakup, which was the least of my worries. I wasn't able to hug or kiss my dying uncle or my newborn nephew due to the steady surge of COVID-19 cases. Watching sunsets helped, though. There's really something about sunsets, isn't there? May it be that sunsets are a reminder that no matter what happens in your day, it can end beautifully. And then, just like that, it's an opportunity to reset. The sunset on Sunday, July 19th, did, just like that, end beautifully. But the reset took a little bit longer. I'd been working a 4-day stretch of 12-hour shifts. After work, I took a long shower, longer than usually, actually, and boy, am I glad I enjoyed it, because little did I know it would be the last time I was ever going to be able to shower myself again. I sunk into the couch, pajamas on, hair still wet. As I looked out the window and saw the beautiful sunset, I couldn't help but want to get a better view. I grabbed a blanket and climbed the ladder up to my rooftop like I had done plenty of times before. I lay up there watching the sun escape beneath the horizon, and then, as it darkened, admiring the stars take over the sky. I remember reflecting, the quiet peacefulness of the dark night cleared my mind, and I remember reflecting on how free I felt, as if the world were at my fingertips. I felt so alive and powerful, recalling how I had been able to contribute to saving someone's life earlier that night. I have the best job in the world, I thought. I truly found my calling. This is what I'm meant to be doing. When it was time to descend the 12-foot ladder into the darkness, I lost my footing and slipped. As I was falling, I specifically remember expecting to just land on my 2 feet. I'm an athlete, after all. Instead, all of a sudden, I was on my back on the hard cement ground at the base of the ladder, looking up at the same starry night that just provided me with such peace. I felt immediate pain in my right shoulder and thought, that's gonna hurt like a bitch in the morning. Nothing else hurt, though, and I quickly learned why. I went to flex my abs and put my arms out to crunch my upper body forward, but nothing happened. I brought my chin to my chest and saw my legs were not where I thought they were. My knees were bent and my legs were crumbled next to me. I went to move them, and again, nothing happened. In that moment, I knew I was paralyzed. And then an eerie silence took over, a calm before the storm, if you will. I fell on my phone, so Siri wasn't registering to call 911. I didn't know how long I had to prepare myself for the chaos and uncertainty that was to come before someone found me and took me to the hospital. I didn't know how long I had to reminisce about my 27 years of life, to think about how relatively privileged I had been up until this point, Did I take advantage of it? Am I seriously getting punished right now? Would I have done anything differently? I just settled into my job after years of schooling. Was it all for nothing? Will I ever operate again? I was so embarrassed and in disbelief with what just happened. Can I rewind real quick? To my surprise, even with all these racing thoughts, I remained relatively calm. I knew I could do more damage if I panicked, so all I could do was take a deep breath and just wait for everything to change. As I was about to enter the OR to have the surgery that would decompress my spinal cord and repair my broken neck, I finally broke down crying to my parents for the first time. I was on the phone with them, terrified of what the outcome would be. My surgical knowledge knew there were huge risks. When I woke up from surgery and saw my mom's face sitting next to me, all I could do was smile because I was just so happy to be awake and alive. But then seeing my mom's horrified face, reality hit in real quick, and I felt so bad for causing so much pain to my family. I knew they were scared, and I apologized endlessly as each one visited me, one at a time. COVID rules. I blame myself for what happened 4 years later, and I'm still working on forgiving myself. As the days passed and the complications arose, I became so angry. Why aren't my nerves waking up? Why can't I wiggle my toes? Why can't I move my fingers? Just give me my goddamn fingers. Anger turned into fury. Unable to move the majority of my body while laying awake, but with a breathing tube down my throat, I had panic attacks almost every night. The tube eventually came out, but my injured diaphragm was affected by my injured spinal cord. I had to relearn how to breathe entirely. This was complicated by a punctured lung, pneumonia, and a mucus plug. I was so frustrated I wasn't progressing. 12 days after my fall, it was my birthday, and I was begging for my attending to give me a tracheotomy because I felt like I was drowning in my own saliva. The outpouring of community support I received, though, through cards and flowers and gifts, kept me entering a depression in the hospital. There was this one card that I had taped to my wall across my bed, right under the TV. I'm brave, I'm strong, I'm loved. I'd recite that to myself dozens of times per day. I am brave, I'm strong, I am loved. I had so much gratitude in my heart, and I was hopeful that if I put in the work, I would make a full recovery, because that's what life had taught me up until this point. I was never the smartest or the most athletic, but I knew how to work hard. This eager and hardworking spirit led me to move my body before I was ready. I was alone in my room the majority of the time. Visitors were still very much restricted, but I had no time to waste. PT and OT sessions were so short, I felt like it was up to me to practice swinging my legs to the side of the bed. How else was I going to walk in 6 months if I can't even do that yet? Well, this resulted in many falls off the bed, which left me feeling disappointed as I lay stuck and helpless on the ground. Once I couldn't reach the call bell, so I just had to wait until my nurse came in the room and frantically called a rapid response. I quickly had about 10 sets of eyes looking down at me. Felt like I was a heavy piece of furniture they had to brainstorm how to lift. I later, though, earned myself a new piece of hospital jewelry, and this one said fall risk right on the wrist. I feel like they should have known that, considering how I got to the hospital in the first place, but. When I left the hospital and entered the next stage of my recovery, rehab at Spalding Rehabilitation Center, I became overwhelmed as I learned just how many changes I would have to make to my everyday life. Recovery was so much more than just going to physical therapy. There's bowel and bladder management, chronic pain, low blood pressure, medications, pressure sores, UTI, short-term disability, long-term disability, SSI, SSDI, wheelchair fittings, adaptive tools and equipment. I felt so alone, constantly trying to explain to people what I needed when I didn't even know myself. Realizing that I would likely have to be in a chair the rest of my life made me question if I wanted to live this life at all. and that was terrifying. I've always been a really optimistic person, so these kinds of thoughts were so foreign to me. The American philosopher Cornel West says, "There's a fine line between optimism and hope. Optimism is a naive mindset," he says. Hope is real. With time, I got the daily help and equipment I needed. I settled down into routine. My personal care needs and my daily tasks became a little bit easier. I eventually accepted that I would never get my old life back. And with that, I discovered that I don't have to walk to be happy. I mean, don't get it twisted. My will to walk will never cease, and I want to walk, and I'm never going to stop trying. But acceptance helped me discover and develop a real sense of hope for the future. Not optimism, hope. Hope for a cure, hope that if I keep my body strong and healthy, once there is a cure, it'll be ready. Hope for, in the meantime, happiness and independence. But even with all that awesome progress and hope, grief persisted. Why? I don't think grief ever really goes away. Grieving is physically exhausting, and for me, what that looks like is constantly feeling sleep deprived, but then feeling guilty for sleeping too much because then I feel lazy and unproductive. So then I go on autopilot, but on autopilot, you can only go as fast as the speed limit, and in this body, it's like -2 miles per hour. This injury on the surface is a physical injury. And because of this, rehabbing the physical body is the priority. But grief is powerful, and it's not just in the mind. I've learned that if we don't tend to our grief, it'll reemerge in our body and it'll limit our recovery. We'll stay frozen and disassociate. Then it'll show up in our lives as depression and stagnancy and disconnection from our emotions and relationships. I'm a big believer in the phrase, "You can't heal the pain you refuse to feel." Feel the pain, feel the grief, and all the emotions that come with it. You will emerge. When the worst possible thing happens, you just have to celebrate that you made it through, that you survived. It's wrong to say you find a silver lining, but you manage to continue on, day after day, one foot in front of the other, figuratively speaking. Maybe I should say one rotation after the other. But you make it your life's work just to survive this thing. I wouldn't say it gets easier with time. Time definitely does not shrink grief. Your grief will stay the same, but your world will grow around it. I still struggle with my trauma and my grief from losing the life I built. I mean, hell, just last month, I was on my couch in my apartment. It's Sunday, and I'm forcing myself to relax and do nothing, which often makes me feel guilty. I don't deserve to relax and have fun anymore, my brain usually tells me. And this time, it feels like I'm being punished for it. My insulin pump is malfunctioning. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes before my injury, when I was 18 years old. Technology has come a long way, and if it weren't for technology, I doubt I would be living on my own. But technology fails us sometimes, and on those days, I fear for my life. The problem with malfunctioning insulin pumps is, once you troubleshoot the problem, it usually takes a few hours to truly know if it's resolved or not. Well, a couple cycles of that, I spent all day troubleshooting. This means my blood sugar has been hanging out at around 400 or above for more than 12 hours. My body begins to feel weak, my brain foggy, and I'm dying of thirst. But I've already finished the 2 water bottles I've brought to the couch. It begins to get dark, and this is when I start panicking. I'm brought back to the feelings of being stuck on the ground and the embarrassment that I need help. But I can't get in touch with anyone, and that only makes the panic worse. If only I could get up and walk to turn on the lights, walk to get more water, and most importantly, just walk to get more insulin. If only my fingers worked properly, maybe my troubleshooting efforts wouldn't have failed. Now I'm hyperventilating, and I have flashbacks of the panic attacks I had at the hospital. It's a complete ambush. Instead of trying to suppress it, though, I let it out. I'm bawling until someone is by my side. I need a hug. You see, grief never really goes away, but my world around me has truly flourished. Every day brings new stressors and challenges, yes, but every challenge is an opportunity to learn and to grow, and I know that sounds cliche, but it's true. To make myself just a better person, because not every challenge is a grief ambush, and thanks heavens for that. When you first get injured, they tell you your recovery is going to be between 6 months to 2 years. I laugh at that now. I dedicated 2 full years to recovery. Just recovery. My sole focus was to get as much functional turn as possible while pushing the limits of independence. I was going to physical therapy every day. I was trying every adaptive sport and treating it as a cross-training opportunity. I was talking to as many experts in the field as possible and as many people living with spinal cord injuries as possible. I was listening to as many SCI podcasts as I could. I was researching and involved in countless research studies. I was having surgery after surgery just so at least I could use my hands to my advantage. I didn't stop doing any of that after 2 years, but my priorities shifted a little bit. I wanted to get back to work. I wanted to provide for myself, contribute to society, and have a purpose again. Make this injury worth it somehow. I've been open about my mental health from the very beginning, which has really helped me understand that I do have perspective and empathy and patience that I never had before. My career as a surgical PA was dedicated to fixing the physical body, but now more than ever, I know there's great power in healing the mind, which led me to accept a position as a psychiatric PA. That has brought its own challenges, but I'm learning that this injury is a constant ebb and flow of adapting. I still sometimes can't help but look at others my age and think how easy their life is compared to mine, how good and normal they have it. But then I look at mine and hell, some days I get more accomplished in one day than I ever did before my injury. Next week I'm being flown out to DC and then LA for a new job I took in the adaptive sports industry. You see, the disabled community is never a community you want to be a part of, but once you're in it, you realize how badass your peers are, and you want to be involved with them as much as you can. At least I do. They're a community that lift me up like no other. I feel seen and I feel heard. I never feel like a burden. So when Heidi and Jess asked Stefan and I if we wanted to start a support group for people our age, it was an easy yes. I miss my life so much. I miss my relationships with my old friends, my relationship with my family. I miss being that naive optimist. But I think that some of this comes with the territory of growing up. I was gonna miss those things whether I got hurt or not. Being able to mourn for your losses, appreciate your present, be hopeful for your future is what living in a body is all about. It's not easy. It can be really hard work, but it's worth it. Thank you.